Good morning. I am prepping my carrot beds today. I'll be planting some more potatoes and some beans, but I'm going to start prepping my beds for the carrots. And this is kind of a two-stage process. One is to get the bed ready, and then the other is to seed the carrots and promote their germination. So I'll go over all of that. But what I have to do first is clean the bed. Go away, Lily, working. So what you can see is there is some vegetation left over from when I harvested in the fall. So I've just got the hoe and I'm going to start taking all of these bits of vegetation out. Now carrots are really small as seedlings. So if the weeds get established before the carrots, it's really hard to get carrots out of that bed. There are some other methods to help the carrots recover, but it's really best to clean the bed really well first. So that's what I'm going to start out by doing today. So when I'm weeding, I want the soil to stay here. So I get the chunk of weed out and I shake off the soil, toss the weed out of the garden. Don't just turn it up and leave these ones in the bed. During the season, that can be okay for certain weeds, but these will get reestablished over and over and over again if you leave them on top. I'll explain, and this might be really redundant for some people, but the way that you use a hoe is you go underneath the roots, lift up on the plant. We're not trying to chop it at its stem, we're trying to get the roots out. Okay, I've cleaned out all of the large weeds, and now I took the hoe and I kind of leveled the high and the low spots a little bit, but now I'm going to take the landscaping rake and I'm going to smooth this all out. So that's my next step in prepping for carrots. All right, so I've gone through with the landscaping rake, and as you can see, the soil is relatively flat now. It's drying out really nicely, so I could probably go ahead and put some carrots in this today. And because there's enough moisture in there, I simply wouldn't water it right away. But I'll talk a little bit more about how we get good germination with carrots in a minute. I had made a post yesterday about planting potatoes and warming soil faster, and I got a lovely message from another member of the community saying that clear plastic is going to warm the soil faster than black plastic will, and that is true. The trade-off, though, is if your garden is not free of weeds, you are essentially creating a greenhouse for them, and they're going to germinate before your garden variety veggies. And especially in a bed of carrots like this, that is going to be hell for me in terms of weeding later. So although the black plastic, it will help, it will warm the soil faster than it otherwise would. However, it's going to be slower than clear poly. The trade-off is I'm going to help force germinate and kill some weed seeds. Now, most weed seeds will germinate faster than carrots will. Carrots actually take quite a while to germinate sometimes. My carrots typically come up on day 10, sometimes day 14. Carrots can take as much as 3 weeks to germinate, and that's why they can be tricky for some people if you can't keep them moist for that long. Now, most weed seeds are going to be thriving as seedlings by that point. And if I have clear plastic, I'm just giving them a head start. If I have black plastic, then anything that's germinating, I'm hoping to kill it off before my carrot seed starts germinating. So this method, a version of this is called stale bed seeding. And stale bed seeding is where we force germinate the weed seeds and then kill them because they can't get any sun. And we do that with a thick, dark tarp. Good quality tarp, one that light isn't going to penetrate through very much. So the economy tarps at a place like Canadian Tire or PV Mart, you'll have to do several layers of that for it to work properly. But it will work if you do several layers. A good quality coated tarp will work great. However, black woven plastic, I would call mulch, but it's ground cover. It's a weed barrier. It works perfect. And I'm going to show you in a minute what that looks like. But first I'm going to continue prepping this bed. So now I have hoed out all the weeds. I have flattened the bed a little bit, as I don't want water pooling in certain areas and I want the cedar to be able to go through really easily. I have raked it so it's nice and fluffy, there's no clumps, and now I'm going to roll a glass carboy. Now, a carboy is something you use for winemaking, and I make wine. But it's also a smooth, heavy surface, and because it's smooth and heavy, I can roll it really easily and create a nice bed for my carrots. The goal in rolling the bed before I seed, and sometimes you can even do it after you seed, is to create really good seed to soil contact. I don't want my soil to be too fluffy for carrots. The seeds are tiny, and if I have these cracks where the seed can actually fall down quite a bit further, I might not have them at the ideal 1/4 inch. Which is where you want your seeds to be sitting for them to germinate well. So I take my glass carboy and I roll it across the bed, and it's going to compact it ever so slightly, not very much. And that's really going to help with my carrot bed germinating properly. So I'm going to do that now. All right, so it's flattened quite nicely, and that's going to be a good surface for me to plant my carrots into. So now what I'm going to do is I could either, because I am going to plant this bed right away, I could either take the back of a hoe or a shovel and create a very thin trench just by dragging my hoe along the top. So I'll show you what that looks like. Now, I'm not using this side of the hoe. I'm using this side of the hoe. And I'm just going to take it and drag it along the top of the bed that I've made. And then one of my tips is, if you don't have a seeder, now a seeder works great for carrots. You'll get good spacing, you won't waste too much seed, and it's not very much work. But if you don't have that, get yourself a little spice shaker. Most spices, if you're not buying the bulk quantities in a bag, are going to come in a little shaker, and they have 3 different size holes depending on the spice that it is. They might have small holes, medium, or large. try and find one with a medium-sized hole. You might have one in your pantry, or maybe the next time you go grocery shopping, you're out of a certain spice and it has a container like that. And fill it with your carrot seeds. And then when you're holding the container and you're going along, just tap that container as you go, and it'll let out a very small amount of seeds at a time. And that's one way to be a little bit faster. Now, if you're taking your seeds and you're just pinching and sprinkling them, you're going to end up with clumps of carrots and areas where there aren't any carrots. And then there's going to be areas where there's a really good coverage. So having the spice shaker just helps with that a little bit more. So that's one option. I have an earthway seeder though, and I like to use it for seeding my carrots. Gives me good spacing. I don't waste too much seed. I have very little thinning to do afterwards. I do have to thin a bit, but not very much. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and down this bed with the seeder 5 times, sometimes 6 times, depending if my bed's a little bit oversized. And rather than doing one row and then a row of something else and a row of something else, I'm planting the carrots rather densely. And the reason is, after they get established to a few inches high, I want to be able to see my rows. I want to be able to get the edge, not the whole hoe, so you can see it's quite large, but just the edge, or even a strap hoe, which I usually use for weeding. It's about 3 inches wide, and I'm going to come through and I'll be able to cultivate that really easily for weeding the carrots. And then as soon as they get a few inches bigger, they're going to outcompete the weeds. So I plant densely to provide good cover. It's going to keep moisture in the ground. It's going to help outcompete with the weeds, and I get a bigger yield for the amount of space that I have in my garden. So that's what I'm going to do with the seeder. Now, after I seed my carrots, I'm going to water them. The soil is moist enough right now. I don't have to water the carrots after this, but I do have to cover them. So one of the areas where people typically go wrong with carrots, or where they get poor germination, is carrots have to stay moist. The seed has to stay moist, and the seedling has to stay moist until it's a few inches. Now, when it's a few inches tall, you're going to have to uncover this. But until then, I'm going to have these carrots covered with my black, well, actually, I don't use a black tarp for that. It's a gray roof underlay, and it's a woven poly, and it's a great quality. And so I have extra and I use it in the garden. So after watering, I'm going to cover this bed, and I'm going to put some pieces of lumber down on top to hold the tarp down, and I'm going to leave it for a few days. I'm going to come back and check and make sure it's still moist in a few days. And if it's not, I'm going to water it, cover it right back up immediately, put my lumber down on top so it doesn't blow away, and I'm going to wait until I see germination. Now, there's going to be weeds germinating, and there's going to be carrots germinating. I'll know the carrots because they're going to be in my rows. So I will leave that tarp on until I have about 10% germination. So it's hard to estimate that. It's just by look as to what 10% looks like for germinated carrots. But I'm going to leave the tarp on until that point. Once I get there, I'm going to take the tarp off, and I'm going to water the carrots twice a day, unless it rains or unless it's really cool and overcast, and then I don't need to do it twice a day, but once would be sufficient. And that's going to get me good germination on my carrots. My carrots typically come up on day 10 or 14, and that's fast. 14 is usually the earliest, 21 for some varieties, and anywhere in between. And I've been doing this for several years, and it's worked every year. So I'm going to continue on with this and get some carrots seeded to start. These are going to be some of my summer varieties of carrots that I'll be eating in, let's say, July and August. And then in the next bed over, which I'm going to stale bed seed, so I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. I'll plant those in about a week or two after I've force germinated the seeds, killed them off with a tarp. But I'm going to get started on all that. Okay, so you can see my lines from my rows. This was a little finger carrot. It's a 60-day carrot. It's not the earliest carrots that I've grown before, but as I'm getting them in nice and early right now, they'll be fine for the family all summer long. And they'll start out as baby carrots when we start harvesting them, and then closer to the end of the summer they'll reach their peak maturity. Now, these are summer eating carrots. They won't stay in cold storage very long at all. And so I'm going to be planting some Scarlet Nantes and Danvers. Scarlet Nantes for my fall, winter, because they won't last necessarily as long as some, and then I'll have my storage crop also. So this is a 25-foot bed. I have 2 more 25-foot beds for carrots, and I plant 5 to 6 rows in each bed, and they're 30-inch beds. So that will give me more than what my food planning tool, which I use to plan my food every year for my family, tells me that I need. So it tells me that I need 50 bed feet. So that's 50 feet of 5 rows in each bed in order to plant the amount that I'll need to produce the number of pounds that I'll need for my family for the year. So I plant an extra 25 feet beyond what I technically need, and that gives me room for losing some in cold storage, for having people over that I don't anticipate for feeding. If I had to, I could feed them to the pigs over the winter if I definitely had too many, and I could share them with my community. So I'm now going to go and clean the next bed over. So you can see there's a walkway right there, and then my next bed starts right there. I'm going to stale bed seed this one. So I'm going to, again, go and get all the weeds out. And you can see there's a lot of debris left over from last year. Most of that is just the stems and leftover material from the garden last year. But there are some weeds in the walkway. I'm going to smother those with cover, and in the beds I'm actually going to pull the weeds out. And I do this every year. My context matters. So if you've ever taken a permaculture course, you know the right answer is always it depends, and that your context matters most. And so my context is I live in a forest, and I could show you that here. So there's my forest, and there wasn't even a clearing when I got here. I had to knock some over in the middle of the property here for my yard. And so when I started with nothing but bush soil. So this was all forest, so it's not the best for growing in. And I started with about 1 inch of topsoil and clay under that, and lots of weeds. I have been in the garden, although you can't tell, this in the garden is several inches deeper than it was when I got here. In fact, in some places I've built 4 inches of soil already. Now that's a mixture of bringing in manure. I have animals, and I have sheep and cattle and pigs and chickens and rabbits. And so I am adding manure every year to these garden beds. I'm also adding old hay, and these carrot beds specifically were 6 inches of flakes of hay that I topped with manure the first year. There is no way a carrot would have grown in this clay. And I had a full crop of carrots the first year I was here. It worked beautifully. But now that hay has broken down, and I have about 4 inches of beautiful soil and a few more inches of reasonable soil. So last year my carrots were full-sized. So that's after 2 years of that method. So this is my 3rd year doing this. In other parts of the garden, I laid down cardboard to start, just removing all the tape and all of that, and the staples, and then just layered piles of manure and soil where I wanted to grow things. And around that, put straw. And in those places where I used this method, I am now planting full rows in the garden because it works beautifully and it builds soil. High clay soils should not be tilled. And I have not tilled these soils, not even once. So for those who are starting a garden and they don't have time or the means to rip up their sod, if you don't have a sod lifter, then putting down several layers of cardboard and soil on top of that is a really good method. Now for certain plants, you'll have to put holes in the cardboard so that their roots can go down. For a lot of them, you won't have to. And I didn't. So again, context matters, and that's my context. This is how I have to grow given where I live and what my soil is like. And there's going to be other people who can share tips for you. If you have raised garden beds with clean fill soil put in them, oh my goodness, the things you can do this year. I can't do those things because that's not my context. If you have really well-established garden beds that have been there for 15 years, you're probably going to have to add fertility. You're going to have to add compost or manure, but probably not much else. You're probably going to have nice thick soil. You might have to aerate it a bit with a broad fork. But again, your context matters, and this is mine. All right, and there my bed is covered. I have my lumber down on top. I just use fence posts. And my bed of carrots is ready. I can go clean up some more of the garden. Okay, so as promised, here is my plastic woven poly weed barrier that I use to cover the ground. Now you'll notice there's holes burnt in it. I grow directly in this and use it to help keep moisture in the ground and weeds suppressed. So I'll plant things like cabbage or cauliflower, broccoli, lettuce, strawberries in this, and I have permanent beds in my garden, and so this is put down permanently. However, when I need to lift it to add manure, I just pull the ground staples up, put that down, smooth it out again, and put the barrier down again. These are ground staples. The rusty ones actually work better. They grab the soil better, and so all I do is I secure this ground cover with these staples. Now this is what I'm going to use to stale bed my other two carrot beds, and I'm going to obviously have to overlap it so that the holes aren't showing. This is a 100-foot roll, and I am going to be putting this over a 25-foot bed, so I'm going to be able to do it several layers. And after I've cleaned off the bed, pulled out all the weeds, raked it nice and flat, then I'm going to put this down, secure it so that it doesn't fly away in the wind, and I'm going to leave it there for a week or two, and that's going to help force germinate by warming the soil. And then because there's not going to be light penetrating the barrier, this weed barrier, the weed seeds will die off, the seedlings will. So that's what I'm going to do for these other two beds.